a small, peaceful town stretched lazily under the sun. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where time moved slower and life seemed less complicated. On the edge of this little town, a modest two-bedroom house stood, its paint slightly peeling and its porch sagging just enough to show its age. Inside lived Ethan Carter, a man with calloused hands and a heart far too big for the life he had built here. Ethan was 32 years old, a hard-working mechanic at the local repair shop. He was the kind of man people trusted instinctively. Whether it was fixing a neighbor's car or lending a hand at the annual town fair, Ethan was always there. Life had never been particularly kind to him, but he never let that chip away at his optimism. He had built a life for himself and his wife, Clara, one small piece at a time. Clara was everything Ethan wasn't. Where Ethan was steady and dependable, Clara was free-spirited and unpredictable. She had a knack for lighting up a room and a charm that made strangers feel like old friends. Ethan adored her. She was his world, the woman who made every long day at work worth it. They had been married for 8 years, and though their love had been genuine, it wasn't without its challenges. Clara had grown up in the same small town, but always dreamed of more. More excitement, more opportunities, more than their quiet life could offer. Ethan, on the other hand, was content with the simplicity. He loved their home, their small garden, and the predictability of their routines. Their differences were once what drew them together, but as time wore on, those same differences began to wedge a subtle distance between them. Clara often spoke wistfully of far-off cities and adventures she felt she was missing out on. Ethan tried to understand, but his heart was firmly rooted in the life they had built. It was a quiet tension they both felt, but rarely talked about. Ethan's world began to shift one Friday evening. He had just returned home after a grueling week at the shop, grease still under his nails and exhaustion etched on his face. As he stepped onto the porch, he noticed something odd. Clara's car wasn't in the driveway. Normally she would be inside, waiting with a warm meal, or at least a smile to greet him. That night, the house was dark and eerily silent. Ethan pushed open the front door and called out for her. No answer. He checked the kitchen, the living room, and finally their bedroom, but Clara wasn't there. A small note on the kitchen counter caught his eye. It was hastily written, as if she hadn't wanted to spend much time crafting it. Went out with some friends. Don't wait up. See. It was unlike her to leave without mentioning it earlier in the day. Ethan brushed it off at first, telling himself she deserved a night out. Still, something about the note gnawed at him. It was too abrupt, too impersonal. He tried to shake the feeling, but it lingered, settling uncomfortably in his chest. Over the next few weeks, Clara's absences became more frequent. She would leave for hours at a time, sometimes not returning until late into the night. When Ethan asked her about it, she would wave him off with a laugh, saying she was just catching up with old friends or running errands. But the explanations were vague, and her once effortless charm felt strained, almost rehearsed. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Ethan tried again to bridge the growing gap between them. Clara, is everything okay? You've been out a lot lately. If there's something bothering you, I want to help. She looked at him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ethan, you're worrying too much. Everything's fine. I just need some space sometimes, you know? It's nothing to worry about. Her words were meant to reassure him, but they only deepened his unease. Ethan wasn't the kind of man to jump to conclusions, but Clara's behavior was becoming impossible to ignore. The turning point came on a warm Saturday afternoon. Ethan had been working in the garage, tuning up an old pickup for a neighbor, when Clara stepped out, dressed more elegantly than usual. Her hair was done, her makeup perfect, and she wore a dress Ethan hadn't seen in years. "Where are you off to?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. "Oh, just meeting some friends in town. I won't be long." Ethan watched her leave, his chest tight with questions he couldn't bring himself to ask. Something was wrong. He felt it in his gut. For the first time, He considered the possibility that Clara might be keeping secrets from him. That evening, Ethan decided to reach out to his closest friend, Jake. Jake had known both Ethan and Clara for years, and Ethan hoped he could offer some perspective. "I don't know, Jake. It's just, she's different lately. Distant. And it's not just in my head. She's out all the time, and when I try to talk to her, she brushes me off." Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Have you tried following her? I mean, not to spy or anything, but just to see what she's up to." Ethan frowned. He didn't like the idea of snooping on Clara. He wanted to trust her, but trust alone wasn't easing the knot in his stomach. "I don't know, man. That feels wrong. But I can't shake this feeling that there's more going on than she's telling me." Jake shrugged. "Sometimes you've got to trust your instincts. Just be careful. You don't want to find something you're not ready for." Ethan didn't respond, but Jake's words stayed with him. The following week, he noticed Clara leaving the house more often, always with the same vague excuses. On a particularly restless evening, Ethan made a decision. He waited until Clara left, then grabbed his keys and followed her car at a distance. He felt a pang of guilt as he trailed her, but his need for answers outweighed his reservations. Clara drove to the edge of town, parking outside a dimly lit diner. Ethan pulled into a spot across the street, watching as she stepped out of the car. His heart sank when he saw her meet a man at the entrance, a man Ethan didn't recognize. They exchanged a smile that was too warm, too familiar. The man placed a hand on her lower back as they walked inside. Ethan sat frozen in his car, the reality of what he was seeing sinking in like a lead weight. Clara wasn't meeting friends or running errands. She was meeting someone else. Ethan sat motionless in his truck, staring at the diner's front door. He couldn't convince himself to leave, even though every fiber of his being wanted to drive away, pretend he hadn't seen Clara meeting that man. Who was he? A co-worker? An old friend? Or was it exactly what Ethan feared it was? His hands clenched the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The urge to march into the diner burned in his chest, but his feet wouldn't move. Instead, he sat there, heart pounding, and waited. Minutes felt like hours as he stared at the entrance, anticipating their return. When the door finally swung open, Ethan's chest tightened. Clara stepped out first, her laughter floating across the quiet parking lot. The man followed, holding the door open for her. They didn't touch. Nothing overt. But there was an intimacy in their body language that made Ethan's stomach churn. The way she leaned in to speak to him, the light in her eyes. It was a version of Clara Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. The man walked her to her car, and they exchanged a few more words. Then, without hesitation, he leaned in and kissed her cheek. It wasn't passionate, but it didn't feel innocent either. Clara didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled, got into her car, and drove off. Ethan's world shifted in that moment. Whatever doubts he had clung to were gone, replaced by a heavy certainty he couldn't shake. Clara was hiding something. And now, Ethan knew he couldn't ignore it. The next day, Ethan tried to carry on as usual, but the tension between him and Clara was palpable. She moved around the house as if nothing had happened, humming a tune while she made coffee, her smile bright and carefree. It made Ethan's chest ache. Was she pretending? Or did she think he didn't notice her change? Ethan couldn't let it go. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, he finally spoke. "Clara," he began, his voice steady but low. "Where were you last night?" She looked up, her fork halfway to her mouth. Her expression flickered for just a second, almost imperceptibly, before she smiled. "I told you, I was with some friends." "What friends?" Her smile faltered, just slightly, before she quickly recovered. "Just some old friends from high school. You don't know them." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I saw you." Her fork clattered against her plate. "Saw me where?" "At the diner, with him." Clara's face turned pale, and for the first time in years, Ethan saw genuine fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "Who is he, Clara?" Ethan's voice was calm, but his eyes bore into hers. "Don't lie to me." She looked down at her plate, twisting the napkin in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "His name's Ryan. He's just a friend. I didn't think you'd understand." "Understand what? That you've been sneaking around, meeting another man? You didn't think I'd notice?" Her head snapped up, her voice rising. "It's not what you think. We're just talking. That's all it is." "Talking about what? What's so important you can't tell your husband?" Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You don't get it, Ethan. I needed someone to talk to. Someone who doesn't just see me as the woman stuck in this house, in this life." Ethan's jaw tightened. "This life? This is the life we built together, Clara. Maybe I don't want it anymore." The words escaped her before she could stop them, hanging in the air like a dagger. The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's eyes widened, and she covered her mouth, as if trying to take it back. But it was too late. Ethan stared at her, his heart breaking in ways he didn't know it could. "Then why are you still here?" he asked quietly. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired, defeated. Clara didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving Ethan alone at the table, his dinner untouched. Over the next few days, the house became a battlefield of silence. Clara avoided Ethan whenever she could, retreating into their bedroom or leaving the house for hours at a time. Ethan didn't stop her. He didn't have the energy to fight anymore. Instead, he focused on his work, throwing himself into long hours at the shop to avoid going home. It was during one of those late shifts that Jake stopped by. Seeing Ethan bent over an engine, his face lined with stress, Jake leaned against the workbench. "You look like hell, man. What's going on?" Ethan wiped his hands on a rag, sighing heavily. "It's Clara. I don't even know anymore. She's not the same." Jake nodded knowingly. "I had a feeling. I saw her the other night. She wasn't alone." Ethan stiffened. "You saw her? With him?" Jake nodded again, his expression serious. "I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah, Ethan, you deserve to know." "I already know," Ethan said bitterly. She admitted it, or at least part of it. Jake hesitated before speaking again. "What are you going to do?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have one. All he knew was that the life he had worked so hard to build was crumbling around him, and he didn't know how to stop it. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan realized he couldn't keep living in limbo. One evening, after another tense day of silence, he confronted Clara again. "Do you love him?" he asked bluntly, his voice steady. Clara looked up from where she was folding laundry, startled. "What?" "Ryan, do you love him?" She shook her head quickly, almost too quickly. "No, it's not like that." "Then what is it?" Ethan's voice cracked, the pain seeping through. "What am I supposed to believe, Clara?" She sat down heavily, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know, Ethan. I don't know what I want anymore." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He had fought so hard to hold on to their life, to make things work, but now he realized he couldn't fight alone. "I can't do this anymore," he said quietly. "If you don't know what you want, maybe we need to take some time apart." Clara looked up, her eyes filled with tears. For a moment it seemed like she might argue, might fight to save what they had, but then she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. The next morning, Ethan packed a bag and left the house. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the life he had built fade into the distance. It wasn't the ending he had imagined, but it was the only choice he had left. If you've ever faced a moment where life forces you to make an impossible choice, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life tales that touch the heart. Ethan drove for miles, the weight of his decision sitting heavy in his chest. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. He wasn't sure where he was going. All he knew was that he needed distance. As the town he had called home faded into his rearview mirror, so did the life he had built with Clara. For the first few days, Ethan stayed in a cheap motel on the outskirts of a neighboring city. He spent his time sitting in the dimly lit room, staring at the cracked ceiling and replaying every moment of the past few months. He wondered where it had all gone wrong, whether there was something he could have done to stop Clara from drifting away. But no matter how many times he went over it in his mind, he couldn't find an answer. On the fourth day, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jake. "You okay? Haven't seen you around. Heard Clara's been asking about you." Ethan didn't reply. He wasn't ready to talk to anyone, let alone face the mess he had left behind. Meanwhile, back in town, Clara was struggling with her own turmoil. She had spent the first few days after Ethan's departure convincing herself that space was what they needed, that time apart would help her figure out what she wanted. But as the days stretched into a week, the emptiness of the house became unbearable. She missed the way Ethan's laughter filled the space, the way he always found small ways to show he cared. Ryan had reached out a few times, but Clara found herself ignoring his calls. What had once felt exciting now seemed hollow. She couldn't stop thinking about the look in Ethan's eyes the last time they had spoken. Hurt, betrayal, and a sadness so deep it made her chest ache. Ethan, on the other hand, was beginning to realize that running away didn't make the pain go away. One evening, as he sat in a quiet diner nursing a cup of coffee, he overheard a couple at the next table arguing. Their voices were low, but the tension was unmistakable. "You never listen to me," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm screaming, and you don't even hear me." The man sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not that I don't hear you. I don't know how to fix it." Ethan's stomach churned. The words hit too close to home. He thought of all the times Clara had tried to talk to him, how he had brushed off her complaints as fleeting frustrations. Maybe he hadn't listened as well as he thought he had. For the first time, Ethan began to wonder if he was as much to blame for their problems as Clara. That realization was the push he needed. The next morning, Ethan packed his bag and checked out of the motel. He didn't know if he was ready to face Clara, but he knew he couldn't keep avoiding the truth. As he drove back toward town, he rehearsed what he would say, how he would try to make things right. But when he pulled into their driveway, his heart sank. Clara's car wasn't there. The house looked dark and lifeless, as if it had been abandoned. Ethan stepped inside, the quiet pressing down on him like a weight. Everything was exactly as he had left it, except for one thing, a folded note sitting on the kitchen table. "I need some time to think. I'm staying with a friend for a few days. Don't wait up. See." Ethan crumpled the note in his fist, anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. He had come back ready to fight for their marriage, but Clara had already made her choice. She had walked away again. As the days passed, Ethan threw himself into work, taking on extra shifts at the garage to keep his mind off Clara. He avoided questions from co-workers and dodged Jake's attempts to check in on him. All he wanted was to disappear into the routine of fixing cars and forget about the chaos his life had become. But the silence didn't last. One evening, as Ethan locked up the shop, Jake appeared, leaning against his truck with a look of determination. "We need to talk," Jake said, crossing his arms. Ethan sighed. "Not now, Jake. I'm not in the mood." "Tough," Jake shot back. "You've been hiding out for weeks, and I'm not letting you do this to yourself anymore." Reluctantly, Ethan unlocked his truck and motioned for Jake to get in. They drove in silence for a while before Ethan finally spoke. "What do you want me to say, Jake?" That I'm fine, because I'm not. Jake nodded. I know you're not. But running away isn't going to fix anything. Ethan clenched the steering wheel. What am I supposed to do, Jake? She's the one who gave up. She's the one who... His voice broke and he shook his head. I don't even know who she is anymore. Jake sighed, leaning back in his seat. Maybe she doesn't know who she is either. People change, man. Sometimes it's not about blame. It's about figuring out if there's anything worth saving. Ethan didn't respond, but Jake's words stuck with him. Meanwhile, Clara was facing her own reckoning. Staying with Ryan had seemed like the easiest option at first, but it quickly became clear that their connection wasn't what she thought it was. Ryan was charming, but he lacked the depth and steadiness she had always loved about Ethan. The thrill of something new had worn off, leaving Clara feeling emptier than ever. One evening, as Ryan tried to convince her to go out with him, Clara finally snapped. I can't do this anymore, she said, her voice trembling. This isn't what I want. Ryan looked at her, confused. What are you saying? I'm saying I made a mistake, Clara said, tears streaming down her face. I thought I wanted more, but all I've done is destroy the one thing that mattered most. Ryan didn't argue. He simply nodded and let her go. Clara returned home that night, unsure of what to expect. She found Ethan sitting on the porch, staring out at the darkened street. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I didn't think you'd come back, Ethan said finally, his voice quiet. Clara sat down beside him, her hands trembling. I didn't think I would either. They sat in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Finally, Clara spoke. I don't expect you to forgive me, Ethan, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. Why, Clara? Why did you do it? She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was scared that this was all there was, that I'd wake up one day and realize I wasted my life. But I didn't see what I already had. I didn't see you. Ethan's heart ached at her words. He wanted to hate her, to push her away, but the pain in her voice made it impossible. I don't know if we can fix this, he said honestly. I don't know if I can trust you again. Clara nodded, wiping her tears. I understand, but if there's even the smallest chance, I want to try. I'll do whatever it takes, Ethan. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked out at the street, the quiet stretching between them. Finally, he spoke. We'll take it one day at a time. Their journey was far from over. The road to rebuilding their relationship was filled with challenges, but for the first time in months, they faced them together. If you've ever faced a moment where trust was tested and fought to rebuild, share your experience in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of love, loss, and redemption. Ethan and Clara had agreed to try, but trying wasn't the same as succeeding. The cracks in their relationship were still raw, and every conversation felt like walking through a minefield. There were good days, moments when Ethan would catch Clara smiling at something small, or when she'd touch his arm in passing, as if remembering the connection they once had. But there were also bad days, when the weight of their past mistakes hung too heavy, and silence stretched between them like a chasm. It wasn't just about forgiving Clara, it was about Ethan forgiving himself. He couldn't stop replaying the moments he had missed the signs, the nights he had stayed late at the shop, thinking he was building a better life for them when all Clara had wanted was his attention. The realization hurt almost as much as her betrayal. One evening, they sat together in the living room, the TV playing in the background. Clara hesitated before speaking. I need to tell you something, she said softly, her hands nervously twisting the edge of a pillow. Ethan glanced at her, wary but attentive. What is it? It's about Ryan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I I ended it with him before I came back. I told him there was nothing there, that I couldn't do it anymore. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had suspected as much. But hearing her say it aloud made it feel more real. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to know that I chose you, she said, her eyes filling with tears. Even if it's too late, even if you never trust me again, I need you to know that I'm here because I want to be. Ethan nodded slowly, his emotions warring inside him. He wanted to believe her, but doubt still lingered. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. As the weeks passed, their lives began to settle into a new rhythm. Ethan made an effort to spend more time at home, and Clara took small steps to show her commitment. They started going on walks in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, slowly peeling back the layers of tension between them. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. One day, Clara suggested they attend a community barbecue. It was the first social event they'd gone to together in months, and Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure he was ready to face the curious glances and whispered gossip that would undoubtedly follow them. But Clara looked at him with hope in her eyes, and he couldn't say no. At the barbecue, they were met with a mix of smiles and subtle stares. Ethan could feel the weight of people's curiosity, but he kept his focus on Clara. They stuck close together, exchanging polite conversations with neighbors and friends. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a glimmer of normalcy, until he saw Ryan. Ryan stood across the lawn, chatting casually with a group of people. When his eyes met Ethan's, the air seemed to crackle with tension. Clara noticed the shift in Ethan's demeanor and followed his gaze. Her face paled when she saw Ryan, but she quickly turned back to Ethan. "Let's go," she said, tugging at his arm. Ethan hesitated, his jaw clenched. "No, I'm not running away." Clara's grip tightened. "Ethan, please. This isn't the place." But Ethan had already started walking toward Ryan. The crowd seemed to part as he approached, the murmurs growing louder. Ryan noticed him coming and straightened, his expression unreadable. Ethan stopped a few feet away, his eyes locked on Ryan. "We need to talk." Ryan glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with the audience they were drawing. "I don't think this is the right time." "Make time," Ethan said, his voice firm. Reluctantly, Ryan nodded and led Ethan away from the crowd, toward a quieter corner of the park. Clara stayed behind, her hands trembling as she watched them go. When they were out of earshot, Ethan turned to Ryan, his expression hard. "I don't know what you thought you were doing with my wife, but it ends now. If I see you near her again, I won't be as polite." Ryan held up his hands defensively. "Look, I get it. You're angry and you have every right to be. But for what it's worth, I didn't start this. Clara came to me." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to hit him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused. But he forced himself to stay calm. "And you didn't think twice about it? You didn't think about what it would do to me? To our marriage?" Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't think it would go as far as it did. And when it did, I realized it wasn't right. That's why I backed off." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," Ryan admitted. "But I'm telling you the truth. I'm done. She's your wife, Ethan. Always has been." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. "Good. Keep it that way." Without another word, Ethan turned and walked away, his chest tight with a mix of anger and relief. Back at the barbecue, Clara was waiting anxiously, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. When she saw Ethan returning, her heart pounded. She could tell by the look on his face that the conversation hadn't been easy. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's over," Ethan said simply. "Let's go home." Clara nodded, following him to the car. The drive back was quiet, the air heavy with unspoken words. When they got home, Ethan finally spoke. "I need to know something," he said, turning to face her. "If I hadn't come back, would you have stayed with him?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "No, I would have left. Even if you never came back, I couldn't have stayed with him. I see that now." Ethan studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. All he saw was raw honesty. He nodded slowly, his heart heavy but hopeful. "We still have a lot to work through," he said. "But I'm willing to try if you are." Clara reached for his hand, her grip firm and steady. "I am." Their journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, they were facing the future together. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and hard conversations, but they both knew it was worth fighting for. If this story has resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of love, betrayal, and redemption. Ethan and Clara were making strides toward rebuilding their marriage, but healing wasn't a straight path. Each step forward seemed to come with a step back, as old wounds resurfaced and trust remained fragile. Every word, every action, carried weight, and the smallest misstep could feel like a betrayal all over again. One night, Ethan came home late from the shop. The house was dark except for the faint glow of a lamp in the living room. Clara was sitting on the couch, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring blankly at the television. She didn't turn to greet him, and the air felt heavy with unspoken tension. "You're still up," Ethan said, setting his keys on the counter. Clara nodded, but her gaze didn't move from the screen. "Couldn't sleep." Ethan hesitated before sitting down in the armchair across from her. "Something on your mind?" She finally turned to look at him, her eyes tired and sad. "Do you ever wonder if we're just fooling ourselves, trying to fix something that's already broken?" The question hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had spent every day since they reconciled trying to hold on to the hope that they could make it work. Hearing Clara voice her doubts shook him in a way he wasn't prepared for. "I don't know," he admitted after a long pause. "But I think it's worth trying. Don't you?" Clara bit her lip, her eyes welling with tears. "I want to believe that, but sometimes it feels like no matter what we do, we're just delaying the inevitable." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Do you want this to work, Clara? Because if you don't, then tell me now. I can't keep doing this if you're not all in." She wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. "I do want it to work. I just don't know if I'm strong enough to keep fighting." Ethan stood and walked over to her, sitting down beside her on the couch. He took her hands in his voice soft but firm. "Then let me be strong for both of us. But you have to meet me halfway, Clara. We can't fix this if we're not both willing to put in the work." Clara nodded, her tears spilling over. "I'll try. I promise I'll try." The next few weeks saw small improvements in their relationship. They began attending counseling sessions, something Clara had suggested and Ethan reluctantly agreed to. At first, it was awkward and uncomfortable, but as they opened up about their feelings, the walls between them began to come down. Clara admitted to feeling isolated and neglected during the years Ethan had spent working long hours at the shop. Ethan, in turn, confessed that he had thrown himself into work out of fear that he wouldn't be able to provide the life Clara deserved. For the first time, they were beginning to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. But just as things seemed to be getting better, another challenge loomed on the horizon. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen and saw a text from Jake. "Need to talk. Call me ASAP." Ethan frowned, his stomach twisting with unease. Jake wasn't the type to send cryptic messages, and something about it felt off. He excused himself and stepped outside to call Jake. "What's going on?" Ethan asked as soon as Jake picked up. Jake's voice was tense. "It's Ryan. He's been running his mouth around town. saying things about Clara. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. What kind of things? Stuff that makes it sound like she was more into him than she let on. I don't know if it's true, but people are starting to talk. Ethan's jaw clenched. He could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. Where is he? Ethan, don't do anything stupid, Jake warned. Just let it go. Where is he, Jake? Ethan's voice was cold, steady. Jake sighed, knowing there was no stopping him. He's at the bar on Main. But seriously, man, think this through. Ethan hung up without responding. He stormed back into the house, grabbing his keys from the counter. Where are you going? Clara asked, her brow furrowed. To take care of something, he said, his tone clipped. Ethan, wait! Clara started, but he was already out the door. The bar was loud and crowded, but Ethan spotted Ryan immediately. He was sitting at a table near the back, laughing with a group of friends. The sight of him, so carefree and smug, sent a surge of rage through Ethan. Ethan marched up to the table, his presence commanding enough to make the conversation stop. Ryan looked up, his smile faltering when he saw the fury in Ethan's eyes. We need to talk, Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. Ryan stood, feigning nonchalance. What's this about? Outside? Now. The bar fell silent as everyone watched the confrontation unfold. Ryan hesitated for a moment before following Ethan out into the parking lot. The cool night air did little to temper Ethan's anger. You've been running your mouth about Clara, Ethan said, stepping closer. You think I wouldn't find out? Ryan raised his hands defensively. Hey man, I didn't say anything that wasn't true. Ethan's fist connected with Ryan's jaw before he could say another word. Ryan stumbled back, clutching his face. But Ethan wasn't done. He grabbed Ryan by the collar, pulling him close. If I hear you so much as whisper her name again, I swear to God, you'll regret it, Ethan growled. Ryan's friends rushed outside, pulling Ethan away before things could escalate further. One of them shouted for Ethan to leave, but he barely heard them. His blood was pounding in his ears, and his vision was red with anger. Ethan finally stepped back, his chest heaving. Stay away from us, he spat before turning and walking back to his truck. When Ethan got home, Clara was waiting for him, her face pale with worry. What did you do? She asked, her voice shaking. I handled it, Ethan said, his tone still laced with anger. Ethan, this isn't the way, Clara said, tears streaming down her face. You think fighting him is going to make this better? It's just going to make things worse. Ethan's shoulders slumped, the adrenaline draining from his body. I couldn't just stand by and let him talk about you like that. I had to do something. Clara stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. What I need is for you to be here. With me, not out there fighting my battles. Ethan looked into her eyes, the weight of his actions settling heavily on him. He nodded, pulling her into his arms. I'm sorry. I don't want to lose you again. You won't, Clara said softly. But we have to fight this together. Not like this. The confrontation with Ryan marked a turning point for Ethan and Clara. It was a reminder of how much they still had to work through, but it also strengthened their resolve. They realized that their love, though battered and bruised, was still worth fighting for. If you've ever faced a moment where emotions ran high and decisions had to be made in the heat of the moment, share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of resilience, love, and redemption. Ethan and Clara were trying to rebuild their lives after Ethan's confrontation with Ryan, but the tension between them had reached a boiling point. Both of them knew that their relationship couldn't survive another blow, yet the wounds they carried refused to heal completely. Ethan's anger lingered just beneath the surface, and Clara was consumed by guilt. The air in their home felt like it could shatter with the slightest misstep. The breaking point came one stormy evening when Clara received an unexpected phone call. Ethan was at the shop, finishing up a late shift, when Clara's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She hesitated before answering, her heart sinking when she saw the name on the screen. Ryan. "Why are you calling me?" she asked sharply, stepping away from the table to ensure their daughter wouldn't overhear. Ryan's voice was calm but insistent. "I need to talk to you. It's important." "There's nothing left to say," Clara said, her voice trembling. "This isn't about us," Ryan replied. "It's about Ethan." Clara froze. "What are you talking about?" Ryan hesitated before speaking. "I've been hearing things. Ethan's been asking around about me, digging into my past. I don't know what he's planning, but if he keeps pushing, it's not going to end well for him." Clara's heart raced as she processed his words. "Stay away from him, Ryan. This is your fault, not his." "I didn't call to fight," Ryan said. "I'm just warning you. If he keeps this up, he's going to get hurt." Clara ended the call without responding, her hands shaking as she placed the phone back on the counter. She knew Ethan had been struggling to let go of his anger, but she hadn't realized how far he was willing to go. Her stomach churned at the thought of what might happen if Ethan and Ryan clashed again. When Ethan came home that night, drenched from the rain, Clara was waiting for him in the living room. Her expression was a mix of worry and frustration, and Ethan could tell immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, pulling off his wet jacket. "Ryan called me," Clara said, her voice tense. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What did he want?" "He said you've been asking around about him, digging into his past. Is it true?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I've been making sure he doesn't come near you again. Is that a problem?" "Yes, Ethan, it is," Clara said, her voice rising. "You promised me you'd let it go. We can't keep living like this, always looking over our shoulders." "I'm trying to protect you," Ethan shot back. "Do you know what people are saying about you? About us? I'm not just going to stand by and let him ruin what we're trying to rebuild." "Don't you see that this isn't helping?" Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "Every time you go after him, it pulls us further apart. I need you to focus on us, not on him." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration boiling over. "I'm doing this for us, Clara. I can't just forget what he did. And I can't move forward if you don't let it go," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, a terrible one. But I'm here, trying to fix it. If you can't forgive me, if you can't let go of this anger, then we're never going to make it." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging heavily between them. Ethan stared at her, his emotions warring inside him. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the pain Ryan had caused, but in doing so, he realized he might be pushing her further away. "I don't know how to let it go," he admitted quietly. "Every time I see him, I think about what he took from me, from us." Clara stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "He didn't take anything, Ethan. I gave it away, but I'm trying to give it back. Please don't let him keep coming between us." Ethan looked into her tearful eyes, the raw vulnerability in her expression cutting through his anger. He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Okay, I'll stop. For us." Clara wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "That's all I need." For the next few days, Ethan did his best to honor his promise. He avoided any mention of Ryan and focused on spending time with Clara and their daughter, Sophie. Slowly but surely, the tension in their home began to ease, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. But just as they started to find their footing, fate threw them another curveball. One evening, as they were sitting down to dinner, Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He ignored it at first, but when it rang a second time, he reluctantly picked it up. It was Jake. "Hey man, I hate to bother you, but you need to come down to the bar," Jake said, his voice urgent. What's going on? Ethan asked, already feeling a knot of dread forming in his stomach. It's Ryan, Jake said. He's been running his mouth again, and this time he's got half the bar riled up. You might want to get ahead of this before it gets out of hand. Ethan closed his eyes, his grip tightening on the phone. I told Clara I was done with him. Then maybe she should come too, Jake said, because he's not just talking about you, he's talking about her. Ethan felt a surge of anger, but forced himself to stay calm. I'll be there. When he hung up, Clara was watching him, her expression wary. What's going on? It's Ryan, Ethan said. Jake says he's causing trouble at the bar. Clara's face fell. Ethan, we agreed. I know, Ethan said, cutting her off. But this isn't just about me anymore. He's dragging your name through the mud, and I won't let him get away with it. Clara hesitated before nodding. Then I'm coming with you. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but the look in her eyes stopped him. She was determined, and he knew better than to argue. Fine, let's go. When they arrived at the bar, the tension was palpable. The room was filled with people, their conversations hushed as Ethan and Clara walked in. Ryan was sitting at the counter, a smug smile on his face as he nursed a drink. When he saw them, his grin widened. Well, well, Ryan said, raising his glass. Look who decided to join the party. Ethan clenched his fists but stayed where he was, his voice steady. I'm not here to fight, Ryan. I'm here to tell you to leave my family alone. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about you. Clara and I... Stop, Clara said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. She stepped forward, her hands trembling but her gaze unwavering. Whatever we had, it's over. It was over the moment I realized what I was throwing away. Ryan looked at her, his confidence faltering for the first time. Clara, you don't mean that. Yes, I do, Clara said firmly. I made a mistake, but I'm not going to let you keep dragging it out. I love my husband, and I'm not going to let you ruin what we're trying to rebuild. The room was silent, all eyes on them. Ethan watched as Ryan's expression shifted, the smugness replaced by something that looked almost like regret. He stood, tossing some cash on the counter. Fine, Ryan said, his voice quiet. You've made your choice. He walked past them without another word, disappearing into the night. The room slowly came back to life as people resumed their conversations, but Ethan and Clara stood frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in. Ethan turned to Clara, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. Thank you. Clara smiled through her tears. We did this together. Their journey wasn't over, but in that moment, Ethan and Clara knew they had taken the first real step toward healing. They left the bar hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. If you've ever had to fight for something you believed in, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and redemption. Ethan and Clara left the bar in silence, the night air cool against their skin. For the first time in months, they felt like they were on the same page, united in a way they hadn't been in years. But the encounter with Ryan had left a lingering unease in both of them. Despite Ryan walking away, they both knew their problems wouldn't magically disappear. As they drove home, Ethan glanced at Clara. Her face was illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard lights, and he could see the tension etched into her features. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded but didn't look at him. I don't know if it's really over. People like Ryan, they don't let go that easily. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. If he tries anything, we'll deal with it. Together. Clara finally turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'm tired of fighting, Ethan. I just want peace. For us, for Sophie. Ethan reached over, taking her hand in his. We'll get there, I promise. The following days were quiet but tense. Clara avoided town as much as possible, wary of the whispers that still followed her. Ethan did his best to reassure her, but he couldn't deny that he felt the eyes of their small community on him too. The weight of their shared mistakes hung over them like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. Then came the phone call that would change everything. Ethan was at work, elbow deep in the engine of an old pickup, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered, his voice clipped. "Ethan here." It was Jake, and his tone was urgent. "You need to get home, now." Ethan's heart sank. "What's wrong? Is it Clara?" "No, but it's bad," Jake said. "Ryan's been arrested. He was drunk and mouthing off again, this time to the wrong people. And Ethan, he mentioned your name." "What did he say?" Ethan demanded, his pulse quickening. "He's claiming you threatened him," Jake said. "The cops are asking questions." Ethan's stomach churned. This just keeps getting better. By the time Ethan got home, Clara was waiting on the porch, her face pale. She had already heard the news, and the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. "What's going to happen?" she asked as Ethan stepped out of the truck. "I don't know," Ethan admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But we need to be ready for whatever comes next." Clara nodded, her jaw set with determination. "We'll face it together." Ethan wished he could share her confidence, but a deep sense of dread had taken root in his chest. He knew Ryan was capable of stirring up trouble, and he wouldn't put it past him to drag their names through the mud to save himself. The next morning, Ethan received a call from the sheriff's office. They wanted to talk to him about the incident with Ryan. Clara insisted on going with him, but Ethan convinced her to stay home with Sophie. He didn't want their daughter to see the strain they were under. When Ethan arrived at the station, he was met by Sheriff Tate, an older man with a weathered face and sharp eyes. They sat across from each other in a small interrogation room, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls. "So, Ethan," Tate began, folding his hands on the table, "you've had a few run-ins with Ryan Blake recently." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, we've had our differences." "Differences that involved you threatening him?" Tate asked, his gaze piercing. Ethan clenched his fists under the table. "I told him to stay away from my family. That's it." Tate raised an eyebrow. "No punches thrown? No heated words?" Ethan hesitated, knowing full well that the truth could come back to haunt him. "I won't deny there were words, and yeah, I hit him once. But that was weeks ago, and it had nothing to do with what's happening now." Tate studied him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, for now we don't have enough to charge you with anything, but I'd suggest you stay out of trouble. Ryan's not exactly reliable, but he's loud, and loud people tend to attract attention." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Understood." When Ethan got home, Clara was waiting anxiously. He filled her in on what had happened, and while she seemed relieved, the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. "We can't keep living like this," she said, waiting for the next shoe to drop. "It's exhausting." "I know," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms. "But we're going to get through it, one way or another." For the first time in days, Clara allowed herself to relax against him. They stayed like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't control what Ryan did or said, but he could control how he responded. For the first time, he considered the possibility of leaving town, starting fresh somewhere far away from the whispers and accusations. But the thought of uprooting their lives, of taking Sophie away from the only home she had ever known, made his chest ache. He wasn't ready to give up, not yet. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, Ethan made a decision. He would stop letting Ryan dictate his life. He would focus on what mattered: his family, his marriage, and the life they were trying to rebuild. The next day, Ethan and Clara sat down together to talk about their future. It was a raw and honest conversation, filled with tears and difficult truths. They acknowledged the mistakes they had both made and the pain they had caused each other. But they also reaffirmed their commitment to moving forward. "We can't change the past," Clara said, her voice steady. "But we can choose what we do from here." Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "And I choose you. Every time." For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Then let's do this. Together." Their journey was far from over, but in that moment, they knew they had taken the first real step toward healing. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were ready to face it, side by side. If this story has kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of resilience, love, and redemption. Ethan and Clara's resolve to move forward was quickly put to the test as new challenges arose. They tried to focus on their family and rebuilding trust, but the shadows of the past refused to let go. Ryan's accusations had left a stain that couldn't be easily scrubbed away. Everywhere they went, they could feel the whispers, the judgmental glances of neighbors who had heard only half-truths and rumors. One Friday evening, just as the family was sitting down for dinner, there was a knock at the door. Ethan exchanged a wary glance with Clara before getting up to answer. Standing on the porch was Sheriff Tate, his expression grim. "Ethan, I need a word," he said, tipping his hat slightly. Ethan stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. "What's this about, Sheriff?" "We've had another complaint from Ryan Blake," Tate said, crossing his arms. "He's claiming you've been harassing him, even after the last warning." Ethan's temper flared, but he kept his voice steady. "That's not true. I haven't spoken to him since that night at the bar." Tate sighed. "I believe you, but Ryan's the kind of guy who likes to stir up trouble. Unfortunately, his word carries weight with some folks around here. I need you to be careful, Ethan. If he keeps filing complaints, things could get messy." Ethan nodded, his jaw clenched. "Thanks for letting me know." Tate gave him a long look before walking back to his patrol car. Ethan stood on the porch for a moment, staring out at the quiet street. The anger boiling inside him was almost too much to contain. He felt like a man cornered, with no way to defend himself. Back inside, Clara was waiting anxiously. "What did he want?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. Ethan sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Ryan's filed another complaint. He's claiming I've been harassing him." Clara's face fell. "What are we supposed to do? He won't stop until he destroys us." Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm. "We don't give him that power. Let him play his games. We know the truth." Despite his words, the weight of the situation hung heavily over them. They tried to go about their evening as usual, but the tension was palpable. Even Sophie, their bright and cheerful daughter, seemed to sense the unease in the air. The following week, Ethan decided it was time to take control of the narrative. He and Clara had spent too much time reacting to Ryan's provocations, and it was clear that waiting for things to blow over wasn't working. They needed to set the record straight, once and for all. Ethan approached Jake, who had always been a trusted friend and confidant. Over coffee at the diner, he explained his plan. "I want to hold a meeting," Ethan said. "Bring together some of the people who've been spreading rumors and tell them the truth. No more lies, no more assumptions. Just the facts." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll listen?" "They need to," Ethan said firmly. "We can't keep living like this, Jake. If we don't take control of the situation, Ryan wins." Jake nodded slowly. "I'll help, but you better be ready for some pushback. People love their gossip." The meeting was set for the following Saturday at the community center. Ethan and Clara were nervous but determined. They spent the days leading up to the event preparing what they would say, going over every detail to make sure they were ready. When the day arrived, the turnout was larger than they had expected. Friends, neighbors, and even a few of Ryan's acquaintances filled the room, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Ethan stood at the front of the room, Clara by his side, and took a deep breath before beginning. "Thank you all for coming," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I know there's been a lot of talk about me, about Clara, and about our family. Tonight, we want to set the record straight." He went on to explain everything, from the struggles in their marriage to Clara's brief involvement with Ryan. He didn't sugarcoat the truth, nor did he shy away from his own mistakes. Clara spoke as well, her voice shaking but resolute as she admitted her wrongs and emphasized her commitment to moving forward. The room was silent when they finished. For a moment, Ethan feared that their honesty would only make things worse, but then Jake stood up, his voice carrying through the room. "These two have been through hell," he said, "and they're standing here, owning up to their mistakes. That takes guts. More guts than Ryan Blake's ever shown." There were murmurs of agreement, and slowly, the tension in the room began to dissipate. Some people approached Ethan and Clara afterward, offering words of support. Others remained skeptical. But Ethan knew they had done what they needed to do. The truth was out, and that was all that mattered. In the days that followed, the tide began to turn. While some still clung to their judgments, many in the community started to see Ethan and Clara in a new light. Their willingness to be vulnerable and honest had earned them respect, and the whispers began to fade. But the biggest victory came a week later when Sheriff Tate paid Ethan another visit. "I thought you'd want to know," Tate said, leaning against the porch railing. "Ryan's been arrested again, this time for starting a fight at a bar out of town. He won't be causing you any more trouble for a while." Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thanks for letting me know, Sheriff." Tate tipped his hat. "You've handled this better than most would, Ethan. Keep it up." For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan and Clara were able to breathe. The storm that had consumed their lives was finally beginning to clear, and they could see a path forward. It wouldn't be easy, and there would still be challenges to face, but they were ready to face them together. As they sat on the porch that evening, watching Sophie play in the yard, Ethan reached for Clara's hand. "We made it," he said softly. Clara smiled, her eyes shining with hope. "We did, and we're stronger for it." If you've ever faced a challenge that tested your limits and came out stronger on the other side, share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales of love, resilience, and redemption. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan and Clara began to settle into a new normal. The storm that had upended their lives had finally passed, leaving behind not just scars, but also a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. The whispers in town had mostly died down, and Ryan's absence brought a sense of relief. Neither of them had realized they needed so desperately. Ethan returned to his work at the shop with a renewed focus. He no longer buried himself in long hours as a way to avoid his problems. Instead, he made a conscious effort to balance his work life with time at home. Clara, too, began to rediscover herself. She started volunteering at Sophie's school and even joined a local book club, something she had always talked about but never pursued. They still had their moments of doubt and tension. Healing wasn't a straight line. But they tackled their problems together. They had learned to communicate in ways they never had before. And slowly, the cracks in their relationship began to fill with trust. One sunny afternoon, Ethan and Clara took Sophie to the park. Watching her run and laugh with the other children, they couldn't help but feel a sense of peace that had been absent for far too long. "You know," Clara said, her gaze fixed on Sophie, "for the first time in a long while, I feel like things are going to be okay." Ethan nodded, his hand brushing against hers. "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, soaking in the warmth of the moment. For Ethan, it was a reminder of what he had fought so hard to protect. For Clara, It was a glimpse of the life she had almost thrown away, and a vow to never let it slip through her fingers again. Later that evening, as they tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at them with her bright, curious eyes. "Are you and Mommy happy again?" she asked innocently. Ethan and Clara exchanged a glance, their hearts swelling with both joy and a touch of guilt. Ethan knelt beside her bed, smoothing her hair. "We're working on it, kiddo," he said. "But yeah, I think we're happy." Sophie smiled, satisfied with his answer, and drifted off to sleep. Ethan and Clara stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, before heading downstairs. In the kitchen, Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Clara. They sat together at the table, the weight of the past year hanging between them like a shadow they had finally learned to live with. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "Maybe it's time we stopped looking back. We can't change what happened, but we can decide what comes next." Clara looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "What do you have in mind?" "A fresh start," Ethan said. "Doesn't have to be drastic. Just something to remind us of how far we've come. Maybe a little getaway, just the 3 of us." Clara smiled, a genuine warmth lighting up her face. "I'd like that." They clinked their glasses together, a quiet toast to the future. The following weekend, they packed up the car and drove to a cabin by the lake, a place they had visited during the early years of their marriage. The drive was filled with laughter and memories, a far cry from the tension that had once consumed their lives. When they arrived, the sight of the calm, glistening water and the surrounding pine trees felt like a balm to their weary souls. Ethan taught Sophie how to fish, just as his father had taught him, while Clara captured the moment with her camera. They cooked meals together, played board games by the fire, and spent the evening stargazing. It wasn't just a vacation. It was a reminder of what they had almost lost, and what they had fought so hard to preserve. On their last night at the cabin, Ethan and Clara sat on the dock, their feet dangling over the water. The moon cast a silvery glow on the lake, and the sound of crickets filled the air. "Do you think we'll ever fully heal?" Clara asked, her voice quiet. Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm and steady. "I think healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning from what happened and making sure we don't make the same mistakes again." Clara nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I'm just glad we didn't give up." "Me too," Ethan said. "We're stronger because of it." They sat in silence, the weight of their journey giving way to a peaceful stillness. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. As they drove back home the next day, Ethan glanced at Clara and Sophie in the rearview mirror. The road ahead stretched out before them, but this time, it didn't feel daunting. It felt like a new beginning. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But they had learned to navigate its challenges together. They had found a way to turn their pain into strength, their mistakes into lessons, and their love into something resilient and enduring. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales of love, resilience, and redemption. Leave a comment below about your favorite moment, and we'll see you in the next video.